feel like sometimes life is really mental.
Dude, that's actually a really good name for a podcast.
So many people go to therapy, but they don't get skills on how to manage their mind. I want to give you skills to master your mind.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Really Mental, where we want you to know no matter who you are, you're not alone. Today I am so excited because we have an amazing guest, Dr. Armin. For those who don't know much about him, he is a brain specialist and owns Armin Clinics, who does a bunch of brain scans around the world, over 80 countries. I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about brain health and how that impacts our mental health. So if you really like this episode, be sure to like, share, subscribe, follow us on Instagram and on any of our socials at Really Mental Podcast. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you, Will, are you looking after your brain health?
Honestly, when it comes to how your brain health affects your mental health, which is obviously something we talk about a lot on Really Mental, it's the basis of it. I don't have a lot of knowledge around that. And so I'm really excited to understand how the two are linked. Anyway, that's why I was super excited to bring Dr. Eamon on and have conversations like this. And this is new for us on this season. So bringing in health professionals to also talk about the topic of mental health, identity, growing up, that's really important to us this season. And without further ado, we're going to hop into the chat with Dr. Daniel Amen. Really excited to just soak up all that knowledge. Let's go.
Hey, Dr. Armin. So how are you going? And for those who don't know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a psychiatrist that looks at people's brains, and I'm really trying to disrupt the whole mental health industry. I don't like the term mental illness, shames people, stigmatizing, and it's wrong. They're brain health issues. And over the last 30 some years, I've built the world's largest database of brain scans related to behavior. Over 225,000 scans on people from 150 countries. And what I discovered is if you get your brain healthy, your mind tends to be healthy too.
It's really interesting having you on today because we've spoken to so many high-profile musicians, actors, influencers about mental health. But to have someone like yourself who is actively, in the field and scanning the brains, to have sort of the background knowledge behind talking about it is really exciting for us. And I wanted to start with, can you talk us through how the brain can actually affect the way we feel and experience things?
Well, your brain, the physical function of your brain creates your mind. And if your brain's not healthy from a head injury, from toxic substances, alcohol, marijuana, from chronic stress, your mind's not going to be happy. It's not going to be focused. It's not going to have good memory. Most psychiatrists diagnose people based on symptom clusters. You tell them you're depressed, they give you a diagnosis with the same name, and then they give you an antidepressant, which in large-scale studies work no better than placebo. Or you tell them you're anxious, and they give you an anxiety disorder diagnosis, and then they give you a benzo that is addictive and increases your risk of dementia without ever looking at the organ they treat. We trust psychiatrists who've never looked at the brain, and we end up with these simple one treatment fits everybody who's depressed, which is just sort of ridiculous. In my new book, Change Your Brain Every Day, I have lots of tiny habits, smallest thing you can do today that'll make the biggest difference. But the most important tiny habit is this one 3-second question where you just ask yourself every day, whatever you're doing, is this good for my brain or bad for it?
Wow. That is it's so interesting because even talking about it now and preparing for this conversation around brain health, I was sort of learning more about the linkage between that and mental health, because the two for me have always sort of been separated from what I've known. Now, when it comes to, say, like vaping is a huge thing. What would you recommend people do that are, say, addicted to something like that, which is bad for them? What's the steps they can take to start the process of getting off that habit?
So the first thing is to love your brain. It's to really go, oh, this controls everything. And I never want to do anything that hurts me. The second thing is know every time you give into it, you're actually making that habit more likely to happen again. And so I like people to go, okay, so how much am I vaping a day? Or how much marijuana am I using a day? And then just cut it down a little bit, maybe 5%. And over 3 weeks, you'll stop it and you won't have to go through withdrawal. There's actually a supplement that I like a lot called N-acetylcysteine, or NAC. And there are multiple studies showing that NAC decreases cravings for alcohol, marijuana, compulsive gambling, cocaine, and trichotillomania, which is compulsive hair pulling. That's not how I got this. And then if they're using substances as a way to medicate an underlying anxiety disorder, it was very common. You have to learn how to manage anxiety. And the first step is to realize some anxiety is important. So the goal is never zero anxiety. So think of anxiety from 0, you don't have any, to 10, where it's ruining your life. The goal is sort of to live at about 3, because people who have low levels of anxiety die early from accidents and preventable illnesses. You don't want to be one of the don't worry, be happy people because they die early. You want enough anxiety, it keeps you doing the right thing, but obviously not too much that you suffer.
For those that want to live like a balanced lifestyle, how can you balance like having a drink with your friends and then also like going out here and there? Because it is a crucial part of life nowadays.
Well, I actually predict 20 years from now that drinking will be like smoking. If you see someone who's smoking, you sort of look at them and go, really? Don't you know that's awful for you? And I actually don't want to be around you because secondhand smoke can hurt me. I believe we're going to have that same reaction to alcohol as more and more information comes out about it, because any alcohol increases your risk of 7 different types of cancer. And so, as we say, oh, well, it's just part of normal society. Well, if you want to die early, that's part of normal society. For me, I always ask myself, so what's the goal? So ultimately, Harrison, you have to step back and go, so what do I want? And I don't think young people do that enough. What do I want in my relationships, in my work, in my money, in my physical, emotional, spiritual health? What do I want? And then you ask yourself, is my behavior getting me what I want? And I just guarantee you, having a drink is not on the what I want thing, or smoking pot. It just doesn't fit. And you go, oh, come on, everything in moderation, which I believe is the gateway thought to hell. Because everything in moderation means I'm going to cheat, and I've just given myself permission to do that.
Yeah.
I want the healthy brain, because with a healthy brain comes a healthy life.
It makes sense when you like break it down and stuff. I think it's so a part of like, because I'm 21, right? And it's so a part of like the culture of everyone will go out for a drink, and you're basically like the only one that wouldn't be drinking if you choose not to drink, right? How can we kind of like teach kids and the youth about these things so they have a better understanding about like the effects of what alcohol actually has on your body and your brain and the long-term effects? Well,
they're only being judged by generally people they don't like that much, because who's judging you? It's the person that's not quite psychologically minded. It's the person who feels guilty about their own use and they want you to come along with them. And when you stop caring about what they think, they stop caring about trying to manipulate you. When the pandemic happened, Jim Beam, one of the whiskey companies, turned their alcohol plant into a disinfectant plant because alcohol kills bugs. So why is it a problem for you to drink a disinfectant? In your gut, there's 100 trillion bugs. There's bacteria and viruses and fungus, and they're called the microbiome, and it's like your fighting force. It's like your army, and they protect you. And they have chores. They digest your food. They detoxify your body. They make neurotransmitters. They make vitamins. And what does alcohol do to bugs? Kills them. And so why would you be drinking a disinfectant unless you weren't that smart? And why don't we treat our bodies with respect?
Yeah.
Yeah. We have spoken about a lot of things that you shouldn't do and shouldn't eat and stuff because it is bad for your brain health. What's good for your brain health?
Well, I start every day with today is going to be a great day. So I direct my mind. I drink 2 big glasses of water. Green tea tends to be really good for brain health, tends to be better than coffee because it has a little bit of caffeine, but it also has theanine that helps balance the edge from caffeine. Blueberries are amazing. Colorful berries make them organic. I think that's really important. Healthy protein. Fat is essential for brain health. So think of healthy fish, nuts and seeds, green leafy vegetables, healthy oils, avocados. People had 42% less risk of getting Alzheimer's disease if they were on a fat-based diet. People who are on a simple carbohydrate-based diet, bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, fruit juice, sugar, had a 400% increased risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. You don't want diabetes, which means you have to be thoughtful in your diet and stay away from sugar and foods that turn into sugar. But yet, eggs are often great for the brain, healthy sources of protein, whether it's fish or lamb or turkey. It's great for the brain. As many vegetables, colorful fruits and vegetables that you can get. And every night, I make my family brain healthy hot chocolate because I love it, but it loves me. I'll take a cup of unsweetened almond milk, put a heaping teaspoon of raw cacao in it, organic raw cacao, and then a little bit of, there's a liquid chocolate stevia I like in the States called Sweet Leaf, and mix it up.
I love that. And there's so many things you listed that are really helpful replacements that people can make, even when it comes to a snack. When it comes to creating a new habit, how do people stick to embrace a new transition in their life?
Well, I would just start with one thing at a time. I wouldn't make it really hard and think you have to do everything at once. I would start by drinking more water, or start by, is this good for my brain or bad for it? You have to create some cognitive discomfort. And so when you drink, you're like, oh, I'm poisoning brain cells. It's like, no, I want my brain cells. I have this fun story in my new book, Change Your Brain Every Day, of Miley Cyrus. I've been Miley Cyrus's doctor for over a decade. And for a long time, I was just a complete failure because I couldn't get her to stop drinking or using marijuana. And then I had this idea, she's an animal lover, and I taught her about a part of the brain called the hippocampus. It's deep in your temporal lobes. It's involved in learning and memory and mood. And it's about the thighs of your thumbs. And it's called the hippocampus because it's shaped like a seahorse. And hippocampus is Greek for seahorse. And every day you're making about 700 new stem cells in your hippocampus, one of the few areas of the brain that continues to make new neurons throughout life. And I'm like, every day, Miley, you're making 700 new baby seahorses. And I could see her eyes get big because I knew she was an animal lover. And I said, the alcohol and marijuana is murdering the babies. And she looked at me. She stood up. She yelled at me. That's so unfair. You know I love animals. I'm like, I want you to love your baby seahorses way more than any toxic substance that's murdering.
Wow. That's so interesting.
For those that are living their life every day, as we've said, they're using the excuse that we mentioned earlier, all in moderation and things like that, right? How can they take kind of this first step? How can they eventually get to a place of healthiness where they're trying to figure out and fix the way that they feel?
Well, it starts with what do you want? And then ask yourself, is your behavior getting you what you want? I want energy. I want clarity. I want a good job. I want a great relationship. Nobody goes, I want to be a pothead. Nobody goes, I want to be an alcoholic, right? It's just not when you actually ask people to thoughtfully tell you what they want. It's usually good stuff. And then the second question is, does this behavior fit what you want? As soon as I tell people to stop doing things, they want to do them. You know, we live in a society of 4-year-olds. It's like, can't do that. No, I want to. As opposed to, what's your goal? And does your behavior fit what you want? Now, if you can't stop, things like N-acetylcysteine can be so helpful.
I think the one thing that comes to mind that we've touched on a couple of times is, what do you want? And I think that's a question that more people our age can ask themselves and to sort of keep themselves in check. What would you say some of the obstacles are that you've seen that people use to sort of stop themselves changing?
Well, the fastest way to get healthy is to find the healthiest person you can stand and then spend as much time around him or her as possible. Your group. You tend to be as healthy as the 4 or 5 people you surround yourself with. So that would be at the top of my list. Who are you spending time with?
Yeah. A lot of people are drinking, they're smoking, they're doing all these things because of past traumas, and they're doing these things because of their past experiences. How can they kind of find a way to heal their past traumas outside of using a substance like alcohol?
Well, the substances only make traumas worse. I mean, you know, if we're really honest about it, if you block it with something that poisons you, you're not really working it through. I'm a huge fan of a specific form of psychotherapy called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's working with a therapist who bring up those traumas, get your eyes to go back and forth, and they just tend to dissipate. As opposed to when you drink to get rid of the trauma as well. As soon as you're not drunk, they just rebound back. And so do you really want to spend your life suppressing them by damaging your brain?
It's pretty interesting to think about, I guess, all the ways we sort of can mask the things that we're trying to work through with these substances. When it comes to your book, which I'm really excited to talk about as well, and the process behind that, Change Your Brain Every Day, which is out in March, what inspired you to write that? Was it an experience, or was it looking at those brain scans and just realizing that people need tools to help, I guess, get their life back on track?
You know, it was very early in the pandemic, I realized brain and mental health are daily practices. That, you know, if you're being assaulted by that high level of fear and control and negativity, that you need a daily practice to keep your brain and mind healthy. And in the book, there are 366 short essays, and there's a daily practice every day. And why 366 rather than 365 is next year's leap year. So if people buy it in March, I want them to have enough to get them a whole year. And I just love it so much. I've written 42 books, and this is sort of like my greatest hits.
Wow, I'm so excited to read it. I'm going to be definitely reading it and letting you know what I think and keeping you up to date on the journey.
It's just so interesting hearing about all these things. And I wanted to just ask, it's a bit off topic for what we were talking about, but throughout your journey studying the brain and throughout your journey with your career and stuff, what has been the major difference in society that's shifted? Have we always had this amount of depression and anxiety and stuff, or is that something that has come up on the rise? And do you know why that is?
Dramatic spike. When I was doing my training in the 1980s, ADD was there, depression, bipolar disorder. I mean, it was all there. But it is there multiplied times 4. In large part, fast food has become much more common. The news is much more common, which means we have negativity at our fingertips, and social media that drives people to think they're not enough. And that is just horrifying. But I'm somebody who believes we can make a big difference, and that I can make a big difference. You both can make a big difference by just every day living and sharing the message.
It's so important to have conversations like these, especially if you're someone listening that is at school and has not really learned much about brain health because of your curriculum. Something we always love to ask our guests is how much you feel social media is influencing the mental health of our next generations, and in what ways do you think it's becoming an issue?
I think it was created to be addictive so that they could sell products, and the addiction to it creates depression and anxiety disorders as people look at fake lives on isn't this amazing, and then they compare it to theirs. And I think especially for girls, it's really hard on their self-esteem. And some of us are trying to use it as a tool to be really helpful to people, but parents should hold off and not get kids smartphones until they're probably 14, and let their brains develop before someone steals all their dopamine.
Yeah, it's very interesting thinking about all these things. I'm going in my head and thinking, what dopamine stealing activities am I taking part in? And I'm going to have to assess that myself. I wanted to do sort of a full circle moment. And at the start, we sort of said, how everything comes from your brain and taking care of your brain health. When it comes to therapy and things like that, where does that sit on the ladder, do you think, for happiness?
Well, I think if you're unhappy, first thing to do is get your brain right. So think of it like hardware and software. If you go to therapy, but your brain's not healthy, it's going to be hard to program it. But if you get your brain healthy, eat right, exercise, take some simple supplements like a multiple vitamin and fish oil, get your brain healthy, then you still have to program your mind. And that's where therapy can be so helpful. So many people go to therapy, but they don't get skills on how to manage their mind. And I'm much more, it's just how I'm wired. I want to give you skills to master your mind, like kill the ants. Whenever you feel sad, mad, nervous, or out of control, write down what you're thinking. And then just ask yourself whether or not it's true. Give your mind a name is one of my favorite tools, where if you can gain psychological distance from the noise in your head, the chatter in your head, you're just so much happier. I think therapy can be incredibly helpful once your brain is healthy. Got to have goals. If you don't have goals for the therapy, you're just going to basically pay someone to listen to you.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
a lot of people can listen to you. You want to go in and go, I struggle with depression. I want to feel less depressed.
Yeah.
Or I do things that I wish I wouldn't. Help me think through that, or give me some tools to help me with that.
Is there a good goal structure? Just if you want to do your goals for the year, right? If you want to do, I want to do my 2023 goals. Is there a good goal structure to kind of keep it simple so people don't feel overwhelmed by all these things they want to achieve?
Well, I would break it down into the one-page miracle that I talked about earlier. What do you want in your relationships? in your work, in your money, in your physical, emotional, spiritual health. Not what you don't want, but what do you want?
Yeah.
Write it down and look at it every day. And the reason I do it in those areas, because if you do it in a balanced way, you're much less likely to be burned out. And I've been doing my work for 44 years, and I've never been burned out. But I always try to keep balance, my relationships, my work, my money, physical, emotional, spiritual health. And I have cool goals. So I don't feel deprived at all. In fact, bad food, alcohol, drugs would deprive me of what I want. And so I'm not good with that.
When it comes to your book, Change Your Brain Every Day, what is something that you hope people take away from it? If they were to just take one, I guess, lesson or takeaway, what do you hope that is for people reading?
That brain and mental health are daily practices. And I'm going to give them the daily practices that will help them.
It's amazing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you for helping me spread the message.
Okay, so that was an amazing episode with Dr. Amen. Again, something really different for us, which is learning from a professional in the field of mental health and overall brain health. And so if that was your first time too, I hope you enjoyed being a student with us on the journey. Harrison, what is something that you picked up from that conversation that is a highlight for you?
I think it's really interesting. I think as a baseline, a lot of the things that we spoke about, when you really think about it, you'd be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like, it makes sense that alcohol's bad for you. It makes sense that processed food is bad for you. It makes sense that lack of sleep is bad for you. Like, those things make sense, but we don't always incorporate the positive and right habits into our lives when we are living a day-to-day life, because we want to have fun, or we want the instant gratification, or we want that dopamine hit. And I think for me, what I kind of learned going into it is that our brain health is kind of like the hardware of a machine, and our mental health is kind of like the software of that machine. And you can't run positive and really great software unless you have really, really good hardware. And I think that Dr. Amen saying that really clicked with me. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, because you can't be a really successful and amazing person unless you really look after yourself and you look at your brain as the organ that it is, not as the symptom clusters that we get told about.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing for me too that I had never thought of, is anxiety and depression. These feelings and experiences actually being the symptom of something much deeper. Obviously, I had the understanding of it comes from a deeper place emotionally, yet having the understanding that there's also work we can do physically that will impact those symptoms, that's pretty mind-blowing, because that means we can actually take action outside of the steps that we've spoken about on this podcast around, even meditation, exercise. Those things are amazing. And you can do those in tandem with also taking care of your brain and taking some of those supplements, which can also really help your body. So it's really fascinating, and it does sort of put things into perspective. When you're going about life, what is your intention with what you're doing? Are you putting the right fuel in your body and for your brain? And how are the decisions you're making impacting your overall well-being? And I think those are questions that are amazing to ask yourself in any situation, whether you fully agreed with Dr. Amen or only parts. I think that's an amazing skill to take into each part of life. What do you really want from what you're doing at the moment? So hopefully that inspired you. And if you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Daniel Amen on our podcast, then make sure you share it with a friend that may enjoy it. Subscribe and follow us on our socials at Really Mental Podcast for more conversations like this that we're going to be dropping throughout the season. And if you enjoyed it, again, please consider rating it 5 stars, because it helps the episode reach more people and hopefully help them in their journey with their health. And we're really excited to be back next week with another awesome guest. So we'll see you then.